this presentation is about incorporating plain language into your emergency planning. So I just want to start off by saying that this is probably, oh goodness, okay, this is probably not going to be any especially groundbreaking information that you're going to hear today. A lot of this is going to look pretty similar to content that you have somewhere in your head. The goal for today is really to make sure that you have a better thematic approach for how to address the content that you want to get out, and make sure that you're doing it in a way that's not only going to help your own organizational capacity and save you some time, but also make sure that you're really refocusing on those important pieces of communication with your audiences. So we'll start out really basic with what plain language is. By definition, it is simple, clear communication that allows your audience to find what they need, understand what they find, and then use that information to meet their needs. There's also a federal law that was enacted in 2010. And the technical writing in it, which I find so ironic, is to enhance citizen access to government information and services by establishing that government documents issued to public must be written clearly and for other purposes. So some really good examples of not plain language utilized for the federal law. This is part of all federal units are supposed to have plain language plans. And we'll talk a little bit more about like what that can look like and where we actually see or what entities in the federal government have good plans and good practices that you as a State Department could potentially benefit from. I do also want to say that while I'm going to be speaking specifically about like language and organization today, another really big component of the readability factor and access to information that goes along with plain language is making sure that you have helpful visuals along with your words. So at the end of this, I'm going to make sure that we have time to go over a resource guide. I've already shared it in the chat. I hope most of you can see along with the PowerPoint. I know that's always a big ask at conferences. So if you have, if you want to look through those resources, there's a lot more information on the imagery that you can be using to help further clarify your messaging, and also some resources about where you can get access to images. Okay. So who benefits from plain language? As many rhetorical questions at conferences go, the answer is everybody. Our audience is going to be the biggest benefactor, especially for English language learners and new Americans. And we know that the population in the state of Vermont is becoming more diverse year after year. We want to make sure that we are providing every one of our citizens access to information in an equitable manner. And language barriers are a huge challenge with that inequity. This is also especially helpful for Vermonters with cognitive disabilities or impairments, and that can be over a spectrum of individuals and also of ages. We want to make sure that we are creating content that can be easily digested for the broadest group possible. This will also help you as planners and you as responders. Not only is it really helpful for our organizational capacity, it also helps facilitate more efficient content creation. It helps reduce confusion for the general public in the case of an emergency. And it also provides some common language and knowledge, which is something that, especially in emergencies, you want to make sure that you all have, you're all working from a common knowledge well, otherwise it can get very chaotic very quickly. So I wanted to get some examples out here of what some very like specialized language may look like. And I don't know how many baseball fans we have in the audience today. I pretty much stopped watching baseball when I got to Vermont. I am a New Yorker, so I had to go with something that talked about the Yankees and the Red Sox, even if the Yankees did not win in this one. But if you are a baseball fan, you may know that baseball has very specialized jargon that has evolved over the course of the game. And so I wanted to give you all a moment to look at this and see if you can figure out what happened exactly in these two sentences in this recap. And I know that we don't have a ton of access, or not everybody may have access to the chat. But if you do, I would really love to see if anybody feels confident in trying to explain a little bit about what happened here. This might not be the best platform for this kind of engagement, so we can move along quickly if this doesn't work too well. But if there's any brave participants who thinks that they may have some options, I would love to hear. It's the 9th inning with a runner on second and 2 outs. Okay, would be hard to follow. Oh, with 1 out, okay. So Randy, I am curious, what does it mean to be in the 9th inning if I've never watched baseball? Yes, once again, New York loses to the Red Sox. Thank you, Jason. Okay, so we have a pitcher who struck out both Ellsbury and Teixeira and swinging to end the game. So what does a strikeout mean? If you've never encountered baseball before, what do you think that would mean? I would explain that usually a game ends in the 9th inning. Thank you, Randy. And then Ian says last inning, we're tied. Last inning, unless we're tied, Yankees are at home as home team finishing the game. Okay, so what does it mean? What does an inning mean, and what does it mean to be the home team? Why is that important in this instance? An inning ends when the defense gets 3 outs. Okay, cool. So what I'm seeing right now, this is really interesting. I've never gotten to do this over chat before, so this is fun to see everybody chiming in, and I appreciate this because like we are really piecing together what it's like to play baseball right now and what that sport looks like. If somebody's really unfamiliar with it or has never never watched it. So Yankees were destined to lose the game anyway, from Randy, and I think it is defined in Annex to a baseball SOP. So we're piecing this together, but now it's getting kind of long, right? What winds up happening here is that we get a little bit. We try to explain some of the more technical pieces or the pieces that had. That weren't maybe written out in very clear language, like you had to be a big baseball fan or a follower of the game to understand what they meant. So then we take a step back and we try to explain that bit. But then every time we take that step back and we build out, we're actually making this a longer process. And that's something that somebody is going to have to then remember all the pieces of the game. It looks like we have Liz say the Yankees almost pulled out a win at the end of the baseball game, but the Red Sox were able to clutch the win by striking out the last batter. So I think that's a pretty good summary, Liz. I really appreciate that. And I would say we could even be simplifying that a little bit more. The Yankees almost pulled out a win. Something exciting happened, right? We have a lot of dynamic, but then they lost, as we had Randy say, because the Yankees usually lose. My mom will be very upset to hear me say that. Yeah, we had a game. There was almost an upset, and then there wasn't. Keeping things simple and not getting bogged down in all of the technical pieces that we may have to take a step back to try to explain again is going to be a really beneficial component of trying to get information quickly out to our community. We obviously, in cases of emergency, want to make sure that we have everything that we need to ensure that we're pointing our audience or community members into safety and not towards danger. But we also want to make sure that we're not giving them more information than they need in a way that will then wind up potentially confusing them or taking so long to explain that we're negating the process of giving them content to begin with. So here are some of the basics for plain language. As I go through these, I just want to give you like a heads up that you don't need to have an amazing grasp on like the specifics of English language grammar to be a very effective plain language writer. You also similarly, it may be helpful in discussing this if we go over some terminology and there's some questions about the terminology, that's fine. But basically, we want to keep this as simple as possible. And while we do, especially as if you are a communicator or if you're somebody that just really likes writing or reading in that fact, you know that having complex structures is something that we usually like to see as consumers because it's more engaging and will keep our interest going. But there's a way to make engaging content that is not going to overly complicate a message. And so in these instances specifically, using like reader-centered material is going to be really helpful. Writing your content in second person, so you are actively engaging your audience that way by saying, hey, you, this is a message for you. If we are in a state of flooding, we want you to go here. We also want to use active voice and tenses, so we don't want to slip into passive states where we're talking more about the structure or the state and not necessarily like the subject or the person. So always trying to stay in those kinds of voices and tense. Also, we want to avoid using past tense or overly complicated tenses. Sticking in simple present tense is a great way to get your message across. Similarly, you want to be using short sentences and paragraphs, globs of text, whether they're on a screen or on a poster or in a letter, can be really boring to look at, and it can make it even more of a challenge to engage in. So keep your content short and concise whenever possible. And when that's not entirely possible, or even if it is, using lists, headers, and tables is a really great way to break up that information and also have your reader be able to scan something quickly and get a better idea of whether or not it's something that is going to be helpful for them or if it's pertinent to them. Things to avoid is a lot of background information or giving a ton of context where you might not need it. I know especially if you are somebody that is in the planning process or is doing grant writing, that requires a lot of that background information and that contextualization. And this is an area where you can really be shedding that if you're going to be sharing content with the public. You want to be avoiding passive voices and complex sentence structures, large blocks of text, and as often as possible, avoid idiomatic expressions, figurative language, and multisyllable words. Multisyllable words will increase your reading level pretty quickly. There are going to be exceptions to that. There are more general words, especially if you're working with specific populations. A lot of my background is in the disability field, and so language like paraprofessional, while many syllables is something that almost anybody who is in the disability or special education realm would recognize that word very quickly. But making sure that you're using, whenever you have the opportunity to use a simpler word, that you're choosing that simpler word. Similarly, jargon and acronyms can slow down the absorption of information. You are constantly thinking, one, if you don't know the jargon, that can detract, but also acronyms, if it's especially something that is rather unique and not universally used, it is likely to delay learning. It may result in a Google tangent, and then your audience may not get the information that they need. And so as we're looking at the organization component of creating content in plain language, the three biggest components of this, and kind of like your starting points, should really be always starting with your audience. What is it that they need to know, and how do they regularly access information, and how do they most availably have access to that information? A lot of the times when we're talking about plain language, or we're talking about communicating with our public, we are seeing things like putting things on public-facing websites, potentially doing some PSAs that are video or commercial, and even sometimes like having posters or flyers, but making sure that those are targeting every component of our population, especially now as our demographics are changing a little bit. I know we are comfortable using the internet to facilitate a lot of our learning here with this system. How much of rural Vermont still has access to reliable internet? Or do we have families in schools whose children may have access to the internet at home, and who may be English language learners, but we have parents at home who do not speak English and who do not have access to the internet? Making sure that we have, and how are they getting their information? What organizations are they involved in? And who do we know who we can be communicating with? Making sure that we're identifying all the ways in which we need to communicate with our audience, as well as exactly who our audience is going to be one of the biggest time savers you can have while you're planning for external communications, or even if it's an internal plan that you know will eventually lead to external communications. Next up would be breaking information up logically. Again, nothing really new here. This isn't a very dynamic and enthralling piece of literature that you're writing. You want to basically give the most important piece of information right up front. You want to make it big. You want to make sure that everybody sees exactly what they need to know. You're not surprising anybody with this information, right? We want them all to know exactly what you need them to know, and then put the rest of the information in order of that importance. We can use design and formatting features to help convey the message, and that will also improve accessibility. So headings and sections within our Word documents, on our websites, even on print materials, having those delineated can be really helpful. Also, utilizing lists and tables when appropriate is a great way to just section out your information. It gives a better visual cue. And if you are interested more in the accessibility components of that, especially the digital accessibility of that, it also helps individuals who use screen readers get to information faster. Okay, and so we're going to go rogue and go out of the PowerPoint here for a second, and I wanted to talk a little bit about converting content that you may have already established into something that is a little bit simpler. So forgive me while we see what happens when I go out. Oh, it's already up. That's lovely. I'm going to go into 500 and 60-something days ago, when we were all first learning about COVID, and share a memo that was written by Dan French. And you can see here that the original audience was to superintendents and principals. And this is, I hope everybody can see this, so I'm going to just pop out just for a second. So you might not be able to read the text entirely, but that's okay. And just to look at the breakdown of this article, of this memo. So we have the audience addressed right up top, and then we start with a little bit of background information, and then in bold, as of February 28th, 2020, there are no cases of people with COVID-19 in Vermont. Okay. We then go into listing some of the precautions that can help the spread of disease, and we have a bulleted list, and then we have a few more chunks of text, and we have a nice heading here on additional guidance, information for families on academic and vacation travel. We also have responding to a potential COVID-19 case, and school cleaning and disinfection, and who to contact for additional information. Okay. Then additional resources. So in this 3-page memo, we have a lot of the content that we had talked about already, as far as pieces to consider when you're using plain language. We have lists, we have headers. We can, maybe if you guys have like the thumbs up button, if you want to give me like a thumbs up if you think that this conveyed the most important piece of information first. We can see if that works. Got it. Okay. Didn't get a ton of thumbs up. So if somebody wants to use the chat and say maybe if there's something that you think maybe should have come before the announcement that there were no cases of COVID-19 at the end of February 2020, please submit them in the chat. And then I'm also going to see, this may be a little bit more convenient for those of you who have access to the chat. I'm just going to put that URL to that memo in there so that I can continue to share my screen back in presentation mode, and we'll go back to our second piece. Okay. And so the next thing that I would like to look at this with you, and this can be a little bit more of a mental exercise, as we don't have the best. I'm also fine if we want to continue to have like a little bit of a popcorn chat in the chat box. That'd be great. If this message, instead of being sent out to principals and superintendents, was going to be sent to the families of school-aged children, what are some of the things that you would change about it? What would you do with the language level? What would you do with the order of information? What would you do with the document structure? If we have anybody that has some thoughts on that, I would love to hear them. We'll give you guys another like 2 minutes and see. We have Dot saying, first change the level of language, then add that there are no current cases use symbols for hand washing, etc. I think that is great, Dot. I know that this may be a little bit challenging to be thinking about a memo that you might not see, focusing on the students. Great contribution, Lee. And we have Diane saying, keep language simple, put the most important information in the first paragraph and also in the last paragraph. Repeat what the most important takeaway is. And then we have Heather saying, simplify the language, put the precautions first, and then that the schools will monitor the situation afterward. And Ian says, strip it down to the most important information, less technical, likely a one-pager. One page, yes, one page, yes. I agree too that this, especially if yours is going home to families, you want all the information that you want to give them on one page. And as we're talking about more pictures and more visuals, yes, I do. I love the idea of having like the hand washing icons on there. That is really great, and also shifting that focus to prevention, right? Like that is what we want to do as we are responding and preparing for emergencies. We want to make sure that we are doing what we can to prevent before we are talking about having to respond. Okay, cool. More pictures, more visuals. Great. Thank you, guys. And yeah, I think that as some of the things that I would also recommend is taking it completely out of that memo form. I think that that might be something that we are used to seeing as state employees. We certainly send a lot of memos at UVM, and I think that that's something that just even that form of having a lot of content on the first 20% of the page is probably not going to be helpful here. Just get that message big and bold in the top, and making sure that you also save room for pointing people into a new direction for if they have further questions after steps about prevention. Okay, and so going now into, I think I skipped. No, I did not skip a slide. Okay, so incorporating plain language into content that you either are writing or you are writing for a different audience, or something that you maybe have already started writing. I would always recommend considering the broadest possible audience first. If you can build with that in mind, you are going to wind up saving time at the end when you have to go through and think about, okay, who is missing from the reach of this, and why are they missing? Both of those barriers will then just add on extra time at the end of this. And I will say, as a communicator, and I'm sure that you all, if you are not in communication positions yourself, the communicators that you work with will really, really, really appreciate having content that they don't have to rewrite in a bunch of different ways before they can share it across broader channels. So being able to think about everybody, or as many people as you can from the get-go, will be absolutely a good first step. You can also use that simpler language to inform your heading and section titles, and utilizing things like summaries or table of contents will also help you keep your organizational component good in your own planning, but it will also be really simple to switch that out into something that could be like a one-pager that you're sending out to a broader audience. Build in the habit of writing short and to the point introductory sentences for paragraphs or sections. This might go back to like 3rd or 4th grade for a lot of you, when you were learning how to take notes and in textbooks, and finding that, or if you were trying to skim a lot of homework in one night, reading those first sentences and last sentences and paragraphs are usually the best way to get your information. make sure that as a practitioner, you are still following that rule of giving those pieces of information in the most concise way possible, in those summary sentences at the beginnings of your sentences. Those again can be pulled out to make shorter content very quickly. And as you're developing, if you're in different phases of writing internal plans or if you're writing grants, that will also be very helpful for just anybody that has to read them, approve them. You'll probably get high marks for your grant writing, and it can always be filled in with more details. And these last two big bullets here, I think are really important. And these may be steps that will take a little bit more effort and will be very much worth it. First is developing a common language between you and the contributors and the stakeholders that you're working with. This is, again, this is front loading some of the work, but once you have a common language or a decision of how you are going to be talking about specific scenarios or specific plans, that will save a lot of time and confusion in the long run. And learning from your community members, you are all doing this work because you want to be serving your community, you want to make your community better and keep them safe, and ensuring that you are taking their feedback is going to be really helpful for your next steps and the next stages of your planning. I would always recommend, if you do not have advisory boards, to try to make connections with others in the community, especially those areas that you think your audience engagement or reach is not the strongest, so that you can make sure that you're doing a good job with your messaging to them. And I would also say that you want to make sure that you are compensating people for their work in this. This is very important work. This can literally save lives, and so you want to make sure that the input that you're soliciting is something that the community also recognizes as valuable, and that they see that value.